Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video I'm going to take you through a project that we recently completed over at the commission studio for a long-time client of ours. Now, we've done many projects for this person before, but due to their position at a previous company, we kept it fairly discreet and didn't want to talk about it much. But since then, John Blanche has retired from Games Workshop as their art director and was more than happy for us to share this project with you. So Ben, our commissions chief, was tasked with creating a small gaming board, predominantly to play things like Mordheim and other sort of fantasy skirmish games upon. It needed to be fairly lightweight, it needed to be really robust, and it needed to be something that you could tell tons of great stories on. You can spend more time than perhaps you would spend painting several armies, and more money than you may spend collecting those armies, on actually painting and creating the terrain. Now, personally, I love watching terrain and diorama type videos on YouTube. That's generally the sort of hobbying stuff that I watch and I enjoy. But if I wanted to make some tables to play some games on, Warcry, Mordheim, Kill Team, things like that, it's just not going to happen for me at that level of detail and execution. And whilst you can pick up phenomenally detailed pieces of scenery now, whether that's STL files, whether that's plastic scenery, resin scenery, whatever, you're also now able to pick up some really affordable, fantastic looking scenery pieces. And usually they're going to have been created using an FDM printer, which is those ones that have those spools of resin on that you extrude the resin, heat it up, and you sort of build it up by layers. I'm sure you've seen them all over the place. And that's what Ben used for this board. So I got him to document the process, I've had him write down the recipes for painting it, and I've asked him for sort of his top tips that he came across when he was doing the project. And this is what I'm going to relay to you in the video. So I guess this is kind of like how Colt does a gaming board. So with regards to the building process, we're not going to go terribly in depth with it. As I said, there's tons of phenomenal tutorials out there. But what we started with was a nice solid piece of wood. It's actually an old tabletop. And then on top of it, we just used normal polystyrene tiles. And then laid out all the pieces for the scene. So this is where you can start to build and think about creating lots of different settings for stories to occur in your game. So you've got some of the buildings you can see there. We've got some plastic sheets, textured sheets like cobblestones and whatnot. And then a few resin pieces like the well and the bridge and so forth. Once everything's marked out, you're kind of happy where it is, scribbling out with marker, then you can start cutting the foam up to allow you to create lots of layers. And for this board, there was a sunken roadway to provide that real sort of multi-layer gaming potential for the board itself. So again, once it's cut out, just always fitting and checking things where you want them to go. And then it's a case of drawing an outline around your buildings and getting on with painting them. And that's something we're going to come to shortly in the video. Once you're happy with where the buildings are at, we're going to glue them in place, and then we can start texturing the board. And for this, we just use normal polyfiller type filler. Just slap it on, get some texture on there. It's going to bring that robustness. It's not very heavy, and it just sort of melds everything together. Once you're happy again at this stage, and drying time is something you really need to be bearing in mind when you're building a board, as is the mess. If you haven't got like a garage or a workshop or something to do this in, and you're just going to do it in the kitchen, it's going to be super messy. So be prepared for that. More mess than you think you're going to make. You will. And then once all of that's dry, it was a case of getting the classic water and PVA mixture all over the board, and then sprinkling on the different grades of sand, dirt, and pebbles, things like that. Again, a day or so later, once all that's dry, give the whole thing a couple of coats of rattle can primer. The buildings are glued in place, and now you can set about with the final stage of just painting up, dry brushing, washing those textures that are on the model, using things like tufts, a little bit of weathering powder, just to tie the items into the base itself. And then when it was done, Ben decided it needed maybe a little bit more colour. The brief was to keep it really drab, but to add a little bit of colour with things like the tufts, and then those classic little seeds that you can buy that you use to represent leaves. So everything on here really, really old school techniques for making scenery, but also very, very simple and affordable. And classic things like nipping down the coffee shop and pinching loads of coffee stirrers to make the planks on the sunken roadway. It's all doable, on a fairly tight budget. And you can see once it's all painted up, and especially when you've got that lovely bit of wooden frame around the outside of it, it's just a wonderful piece to look at. And so many different angles of this board. Ben did a phenomenal job with the layout of it. You can just picture the different scenarios that are going to take place on this board over the years to come as the games are played on it. So now I'm going to go through how Ben painted the buildings. The scenery that Ben's used for the board is by Black Scroll Games. City of Tarok is the range, but it was actually provided for us by the client. So I went and picked up a little cottage to do this demonstration one on, and I picked this up from an Etsy shop called Woofu Workshop, and I will put their link down in the description. We're not affiliated with them whatsoever, but absolutely brilliant service. Quality of the product, say it's printed in this PLA stuff. The quality is absolutely spot on. Communication was brilliant, and all the rest of it. So if you want to go and support a good little shop, I'll put the link down in the description. And as you can see, it's just a little cottage. Several pieces, roof and the main thing, and then the door and the lintel above it was a piece you had to glue in. But get it together, prime it up, we're good to go. Now we base coat it using a classic, one of our favourite paints you'll know we use, a nice red brown. That's Rhinox Hide by Games Workshop. Now you absolutely could rattle can this on, and you could do all of this with cans and dry brushes and whatnot, but we're going to use an airbrush because we have them, we think they're brilliant tools, and they're going to save you so much time, as well as allow you to get some nice effects as well. And one of those effects is by thinning the Rhinox Hide down. So we're probably looking about 2 drops of thinner to 1 drop of paint here, maybe slightly more thinner. And applying it in a few thin layers, we're able to leave a little bit of shadow here and there where we want. Then for the wood, we're going to take a mixture of Rhinox Hide and Baneblade Brown. I'm just going to spray this over all the wooden beams. One thing we're not going to really do on this is use washes in the traditional sense. And partly this is to speed the process up so there isn't drying time involved, but also one of the downsides to this style of print is you do have the layers of the print in there, and the wash does sort of run along them very, very easily without quite a lot of work beforehand. But say with the airbrush, applying it in certain ways, you can get some wonderful effects anyway. And then we've added a little bit of ivory to that brown mix, and then we're just dry brushing that on to the wood to help pick it out here. Now I realised all the buildings that Ben had used on the board were ruined, so it was quite easy to get inside them. I bought a little cottage because I thought it would be fairly quick to paint for the video, and it was a bit trickier to get into the interior of, but I will go through that in a bit. Now for the stone, so over the Rhinox Hide that we've got laid down there, the first layer of grey is going to go on, and this is Eshin Grey by Games Workshop. And you'll notice I'm deliberately sort of mottling the effect as I'm spraying it on, so I'm not just giving it one solid coat of the grey. So we're getting the black showing through, the brown over the black, the brown on its own, the grey with the brown showing through, and then the grey on its own. So you're building up all these different colours and tones just by sort of mottling that effect. And it's something that reads really, really nicely looking at the table. Up close you can maybe pick it out, but from the distance it just creates this lovely natural sort of realistic, for want of a better word, or naturalistic I think it's better, sort of tones to the model. So the next grey we're going to use is Dawnstone, again by Games Workshop. So this is all products that are very, very easy to get hold of, but if you've got a load of greys and you've got a load of browns and stuff, don't feel you need to go out and buy them at all. But you see there's quite a significant jump in value, so in brightness a bit between the paints. And again, that level of contrast just helps things show up on the table a little bit more. And then the final grey is Celestra Grey, so another big jump, a really, really quite light grey here. And again, just mottled over, not hitting all the places that I hit previously with the Dawnstone, but also hitting some of those, just creating variety on the model. And some of this footage is sped up a bit, but most of it's just real time. And genuinely, it's now. You could argue I did this a tiny bit sloppily, maybe, but it really doesn't take a huge amount of time to do. Now, for the interior render on the walls, we've used HOBGROT hide. It's a lovely sort of dingy yellowy colour. And again, when applied over the brown, particularly in that sort of irregular mottled style, you're already picking up. I see these are really cool sculpts, this City of Tarok stuff. The range is phenomenal. Me and Ben are very tempted to see if we can find some time to get a little board done for ourselves in this style. But you see, as you build it up over it, you're just starting to create all this interest on this. So as you glance at it, you're able to read this. Oh, this is the inside of the house. That's the interior walls. Oh, that's the stonework. That's the floor. What I have done is left the wood and the stonework until after this stage on the interior, just because it was easier for me to access it in that way. It's a lot easier for me to spray the darker grey over any overspray of the HOBGROT than it would be the other way around. And then just mixing a little bit of ivory into that HOBGROT to provide a bit more tonal variety on there. And all of this is going to be thinned as much as you need to thin it to get it go through your airbrush in the consistency that you can see here. Essentially where one layer would not be enough, but it's also not so loose that as you're spraying it on at about 30 psi here, it's not going everywhere. Now the brief, one of the references for the sort of how it could look was this village in Suffolk in England called Lavenham, which has got these incredible old buildings in. And you can see all the variety of colours that you could have had on the renders on the front of them. Obviously, they've repainted them, but a lot of it's very faithful to the colours because of the dyes and the things that they would mix in. Not necessarily the dyes, but things like blood and whatnot to get that pink on the render and stuff. And you can get a surprising amount of colour into medieval-esque sort of fantasy type things without being too looking too modern. I think people think it's a very drab period, but there was actually, there's a lot of evidence. There was tons of colour sort of everywhere. So to achieve that on the exterior render, we went for Bugman's Glow. And again, I'm sure you know what I'm going to say, we're sort of mottling it over the surface. Just making it look like these surfaces have way more detail and the size of them and the way the light is playing off them looking more natural. This was really fun to do, by the way, this house. If you're looking for like a little palette cleansing project, like something like this would be really cool. And everyone should play Mordheim, it's incredible. And then to highlight it, added in a little sunny skin tone, which is sort of an orangey flesh colour here, to highlight that up with, rather than the ivory, just because that would have desaturated it and took it right into the sort of light pink. By adding that slightly more orange in there, you get a bit nicer colour. So you can see here the nice difference between the interior and the external render. Now the next couple of steps are hugely important and impactful in the overall result. And this is where we're going to use contrast paints, but through the airbrush. It's a tiny bit of thinner to get them to go through, but not too much. And I'm going to spray these into some of the shadows that we want to bring back to make sure we get nice separation between different areas of the model. But also, just to weather up and dirty up the wood and the stonework. Really effective. And as I always say with airbrushing contrast, they dry a little stronger than it looks like they go on. So you're much better off to work your way around the building once, see if you want to add some more, add it on a second pass, and so on and so forth. But it's a great way to fix up any little bits of overspray you might have got as well, and just help blend them together a little bit. The key here was getting this board done in a timely fashion. And then all I'm doing there is just pulling the needle back without any air, so it loads all the liquid at the end, and then just spraying that off just to create a few little splatters of dirt. If you don't like that, don't do it. If you want to try flicking it off your brush, you can do that as well. But just in case you're wondering what I was doing there. And then the next colour that we're going to use in a very similar way is Creed Contrast, which is a green contrast paint. I actually changed to what Ben told me to do here. He did the roof tiles, the wooden roof tiles, the same as the rest of the wood. I think on the destroyed buildings that probably looks absolutely fine, but when the roof is complete like it was on this, I felt it made the whole thing look a little bit, there wasn't enough variety there. So I left the wood tiles the Rhinox High Brown, and then just gave them really heavy sprays of the Creed Camo just to change the colour on them. And then we'll do a little bit less than we did with the Ratling here. But again, just bringing colour and life into the wood and the stone. Maybe it's a bit of moss, that sort of thing, that we can represent. And then speaking of moss, you can go in and add a little bit of this on. Now, if you can use various products that are out there to create moss, or you can just get yourself a nice sort of olive green colour here that I've just mixed up on the palette, and stipple that in just to create a few little areas where you think there's some moss that's going to have built up. And just these little flashes of colour can make a really big difference. Also, it's the type of thing I love doing. It's just very relaxing. The whole thing's very relaxing, seriously. Like, give it a whirl. Now, for the handful of silver details, particularly when we see the finished board, things like the cannons, the cartwheels, the gibbets, the old iron gates, what we've done here is chosen a dark silver to base coat it with. This is Pro Acryl dark silver, but get any dark silver you've got will be fine. If you haven't got a dark one, mix some black into your silver that you have got, you'll be fine. And then we're going to use a product that I'm sure many of you will have come across. It's really come to the fore the last few years. It's called Dirty Down Rust. Something myself and Ben came across separately years ago when we used to work in theatre as a way of making props look very rusty. It's a really cool gimmick, and it's super effective for things like this. Can really, just a really lovely way of bringing some colour and some life into some scenery like we're doing here. So we just apply it straight over the silver. You can see by the time I actually get to the door handle that it's almost dry on that top hinge. You can see that awesome effect, rust effect that you get from it. And then once it's dry, just go over with a little lighter silver just to pick a few edges out. But again, this isn't taking masses of time. That's it. I think each individual element can't take forever when you've got so much to do. But the overall effect, I think, is quite powerful. And then one last thing Ben did was to weather it into the board itself once it was all glued on, as you saw in those earlier photos, was to use a little brown weathering powder. And also on areas of sort of heavy traffic, so inside. So you can see here I'm just stippling the powder in neat, and all the real tip here is just to really work it in to the model. Don't just tap it on and leave it. We're not going to use any fixative in the sense. We are going to varnish it in a bit, but we're not going to use any fixatives or anything other than that. But just really, really work it in, and it will be plenty robust enough for what you're doing. So hopefully that's given you an idea. And something Ben's written in the notes to me, I cannot stress this enough, you need to varnish it a lot. So we're talking rattle cans of varnish, loads of ventilation, a ton of gloss to protect everything that's on there, and then a matte varnish just to knock all of that down. Same as everything, gloss to protect, matte for the effect. And here's a few little fun little sort of video shots I got Ben to do of the board itself. You can just get an idea of some of those stories that you're going to be able to tell, and hopefully you can see on the buildings exactly what I was talking about. Now those little wanted posters, I think it's an absolutely brilliant touch he did. Ben went and found photos of John and the writer of the game, Thomas Pirinen, photos of them from the time when Mordheim was created, printed them off, put a sepia filter on them on the actual print itself, printed it off, stuck it on, bit of PVA glue, lovely jubbly. And here's some photos of the first few games that got played on the board at John's house, and it was really lovely that Thomas was able to visit and play some games on that board. It's, I'm not going to lie here, it's a huge thrill for us to have some hobby heroes playing on something that we've created. But the most important thing here is that the clients got what they wanted, which was this set. Think of it like a theatre set. It's to sit in the background. It's not to draw the eye away from the main leading characters and actors that are in these scenes. All these wonderful stories that you're going to be able to create in these sort of fantasy skirmish games. And all the board is there is to facilitate those stories. It's to let those things occur and not get in the way. And one of the things Ben asked me, I asked him if he had a few sort of top 5 tips. Actually, get my notes out here. One of them was to make sure when you're doing it as a gaming board that you leave gaps that are wide enough for things like the bases. So the bridge, the sunken roadway underneath the bridge, that's wide enough for two 40mm bases to go next to each other. Where there's breaks in the walls and things like that, there's space to get the bases through. And I think that really does show up when you see people enjoying and playing on it. So other than that, a couple of tips Ben had. Don't discount drying time. You need to plan for it when you're doing things like this, and obviously try and figure out what you can be doing during that drying time. Airbrush is incredibly helpful. It's very, very messy. You don't need to hyper detail everything. Little bits here and there are enough to set the scene and help you tell the story. And again, just to reiterate, varnish the living daylights out of it. Gaming boards and scenery, they're going to get bashed up. They're going to get chipped. They're going to get damaged no matter how hard you try. But that's okay if you prepare for it with how you put the thing together. So I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video and a little look at the project itself. If scenery videos and stuff is something you'd like to see more from us, it's certainly something we love doing, but we don't necessarily have the setup to film them and do them justice at the moment. Hopefully with the new studio coming, we're going to be able to. But if you would like to see more of that, do let me know in the comments. If you'd like to see more on skirmish games like Mordheim, like Warcry, like some of the other sort of third-party creatives like Burrows and Badgers, Footsore, there's that great Barons War game, all these wonderful sort of smallish fantasy / historical skirmish games, let me know as well, because it's the type of thing myself and Ben particularly love playing and painting for ourselves. I just wanted to say thank you ever so much for the support all of you have been giving us over here, but particularly over on Patreon. It's that support that's allowing us to do these projects, that's allowing us to bring them to you, but it's also exposing us to more and more people that we're able to do cool things with and cool things for. And I hope you're going to see some of those collaborations in the not too distant future. So if you've got any questions at all, pop them down in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit subscribe if you're not already, and that little notifications bell to let you know when our next stuff's going up. Thanks ever so much for your support, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com, and maybe Ben can sort you out.